Welcome one and all to another exciting edition of Transformers Reviews. Now everybody, today as you know we are taking a look at the Transformers G.I. Joe crossover, that being Soundwave as the Dreadnok machine. Now, I will tell you this, my knowledge of G.I. Joe is pretty much limited to the movies that we had a few years ago, and I know that there are probably some G.I. Joe fans crying out right now going, "Oh my god, that is the worst interpretation." Guys, I get it. We had the Michael Bay movies that, while they're a legit part of the Transformers franchise, they are not representative of the overall franchise. So I get it in why you feel that way about those two movies. However, this guy right here is not all that is contained in the set, because it is a crossover figure meant to work with certain G.I. Joe figures. More specifically, their enemies, Cobra. And this set specifically is meant to cater mostly to the G.I. Joe fan base and a little bit to the fans that like a little bit of both. Now, if you notice, it says 0% for the Transformers fans. And the reason I say that is because since it has to work with scaled human figures, it will not fall in line with any other Transformers scale that we've got going on. Literally, this thing works with pretty much the only other figures that have been released, which is Megatron and Bumblebee, or the soon-to-be released Optimus and Cup. And hence that's why these guys, as you can see compared to Ratchet, that's why Soundwave is so huge, is because again it has to accommodate the human figures like Zartan here. However, as you can see in this picture right here, Zartan is not the only human figure to come with the set. That is Zarana, and they are both baddies. Now as you can see here, Zarana is the girl with the black dragon tattoo. However, if you notice on her back and in this next picture that her and Zartan actually both have equipment packs. Now Zartan's in particular has something kind of interesting in the fact that when you open it up, he has a distinctly different face because he is the master of disguise. Now if you don't want him to look like he was a missing member of the band Kiss, and you instead want him to look like Tom Banachek, he does have that alternate face that he does sport. Which, you know, kind of looking at this now, it kind of makes me wonder, what if in the first Transformers movie from '07, what if that wasn't the actual Tom Banachek? What if it was Zartan in disguise? I don't think it actually was. Anyway, and guys, I love that first movie, and I love Bumblebee, and I love Rise of the Beast, so don't take it as me dunking on all the movies. I do have my favorites, so I'm just putting that disclaimer out there. And if you take a look at this picture, it actually shows that the Dreadnok Soundwave on his front cannons can accommodate blast effects that have come with many of our Transformers figures. And as you can see here, they also accommodate the longer blast effects that we have. And one cool feature that I love is that as the cannons on the front spin with the ammunition belt and everything, that also the blast effects will spin, sort of giving it a little bit more of that active fire look. And then when we flip around here to the back, as you can see in this picture, there is literally a jet engine mounted on the back of this vehicle mode, and I love how it says danger, and I literally love how that's right there by where the cabin is. Now this thing is a little bit of Mad Max energy, and as you can see back here, it's got the big beefy chunky tires on this little flatbed section that the jet engine is mounted to, and then you've got basically just an armored dune buggy here for like the middle section. And then it gets real weird around the front, because this looks like they just took it off the bumper grill off of a semi-truck. And whenever that detaches, you can literally see that this is the front end with these big beefy chunky tires too. This is literally the front end of a Pontiac Firebird. And what I dig about it is when you look at it, it's literally got the Pontiac logo right there. And before we go any further, guys, this vehicle right here, I see it being reviewed on a lot of Joe-centric channels, which, I mean, obviously you would see that. But as a Transformers fan, I'm kind of enjoying this being a different take on Soundwave. And if you're looking at this whole vehicle going, well, I don't see Soundwave anywhere in this vehicle. Well, that's because technically he's hiding everything on the bottom. So now you're starting to see a little bit more of the classic Soundwave. However, we have to get through a few other things in vehicle mode. As you can see here, Zartan has once again slipped behind the driver's wheel. I love the damage effect on the side, because essentially you can tell this thing has been in battle before, because it looks like somebody literally just rammed right into the side of it with another vehicle, and I dig that. When we look at the other side, you can see that even on Zarana's side, she likewise has had somebody I mean, this thing has gotten beat up. Or I guess technically it is Soundwave. Plus I dig how with this picture of her, you can kind of look down there in the corner and there's a really kind of a sick looking Cobra symbol. Oh yeah, I'm down with that. So I did kind of want to show you some of the details that on the inside of Soundwave's driver cabin right here. And you can see all the little different gauges and the buttons and the shifters, and I mean how the wheel does, even down to like the diamond plating on the floor. That's awesome. The detail of the seats and like that, again, that jet engine right here by the people's heads. I'm sure that's not deafening at all, but it was just some of this little bit of detail on this vehicle mode that I really kind of dig. As we showed earlier, this Soundwave doesn't scale with any of the mainline figures, again due to it having to be bigger to accommodate those G.I. Joe and Cobra figures. So I thought, well, is there any actual Transformers that I have that could go with this guy? So I figured, well, let's roll out the MP1, which by today's standards and even back then, this dude is huge. But the one way that we can 100% without any reservation know if it actually works is if we compare a human figure. So again, we'll take Zartan. So yeah, basically the thing is there is no human that tall in comparison to a cab over. Zartan, it does not scale with that Optimus Prime, which by proxy means that this Optimus does not scale against the Soundwave in vehicle mode. But you know what does? Irony of irony? Well, it's Optimus Prime, of course. Now this Optimus Prime right here does not actually transform. This is actually the popcorn and soda bucket Optimus Prime from Rise of the Beast. It was one of the promotions that they got. So if we do the Zartan test, yeah, honestly I'd say that's actually about right scale. Now, if you don't have the other two figures and you did manage to somehow get this guy, this is an option for you if you did want somebody to scale up against Soundwave in vehicle mode. So that's pretty much it for vehicle mode. So why don't we finally convert this guy and see how he looks in robot mode. So here we get and take a look at our boy Soundwave in his robot mode. And I will admit that while you can definitely tell the Dreadnok kibble pieces that are hanging off of him, for the most part, his robot mode, what we know as his Generation 1 form, is still pretty represented in this. Now, if we zoom in close to this boy's head sculpt, you can see that as far as the chest and the head go, yeah, absolutely fantastic. It reminds me back whenever I used to have the Masterpiece, that it's just on point, no complaints there. And then one of the things that I dig about this guy is how he has a huge Bowie knife. And you can see that at whatever angle you have him holding it at, he definitely just looks awesome with it. And we'll see that here again in just a moment. However, what would Soundwave be without the ability to eject a cassette from his chest? Well, I'm glad to say that even on this crossover figure, they enabled him to do that by first ejecting a cassette, which we'll come back to that here in just a second as well. But in this picture, you can definitely see the detailing on the inside of his chest. They could have just left that blank, but I always appreciate when they go to that level of detail to show that, yeah, he does have a cassette deck inside of his chest. So I'm glad that that little bit of extra detail is there. However, I did say we were going to come back to this. Now, one of the interesting things about said cassette is it is the reuse of the Masterpiece Ravage mold, and I think it looks really, really good in cassette mode. The funny thing is, it does call it Ravage on the box. However, if you actually know your Transformers history, this is not actually Ravage. You will know that besides it looking like Ravage and maybe acting like Ravage, this is actually his female counterpart in the form of Generation 1 Howlback. So basically, if you are a masterpiece collector, the only way to get that character of Howlback was to buy this set. However, we know that Hasbro is not beyond doing such things. Now, if I'm going to critique this masterpiece, I mean, it does an excellent job. This is a very, very decent representation of what their feline alt mode should be. I'm not too crazy about these panels right here on the insides of the body. And just a small little nitpick, but I love the rockets on the hips and the detailing. How this thing comes together is very, very fine. But again, considering that it is from the masterpiece version, I'm not surprised that there's tiny little intricacies that are involved with this girl right here. So the level of disrespect that this set has astounds me sometimes. And yes, this is meant to represent the comic where Baroness had Ravage on a chain. Although, again, my knowledge is scant, but I believe in that comic, Cobra came across the crashed Ark and it turned all the Decepticons and the Autobots into like weapons, and like they were in control of them, and it was just really disrespecting the robots. And I never like that approach where Cobra is the one calling the shots. I mean, if the Decepticons ally with them by their own choice, then it's okay, but it's like if Cobra is the one pulling the strings, I don't like that. Because do you really think that Soundwave would be okay with Zartan treating one of his beloved cassettes like his own personal pet? I don't think so. And I kind of like this because Zartan's like, hey man, it was a mistake. Won't happen again. See, this is the way it should be, with the Decepticons keeping the puny humans in their place. So one thing that I do want to go ahead and point out is I like how they reutilize the jet booster as his traditional missile launcher cannon that is iconic. Now, if you go ahead and look at it, there are a couple of details in there referencing that. So that's really cool. One of the other details that we need to look at is his gun, because we saw how this was used in vehicle mode. Now, while this boy, I believe Soundwave can definitely rock this weapon, I just don't like how it's a little bit offset in his hand. Basically because whenever we have Transformers that have double-barreled weapons, I prefer for them to at least have the gun grip in the center of the weapon. So again, this is just a minor nitpick. But if I had had my way, I would have preferred to have given him his traditional needle zapper gun. But the boy's working with what he has, because when you look at it, yeah, Soundwave can use it, and even though, yes, it is a piece of him, it's not actually meant for him. And this is where I get just a little bit more of that disrespect feeling that this whole set keeps giving me. And the reason that I say it's not for him, we'll see here in just a moment. However, like we saw earlier, he does have this giant Bowie knife on his leg. However, with Soundwave being frightening enough, if you saw this dude coming at you with a giant knife that, again, compared to the size of humans, look how big this is compared to her. Sucker's like at least half her body height. So yeah, that sucker's pretty freaking huge, and it would be frightening for him to come after you with it. So if you guys saw in vehicle mode, this is actually the part that forms the armored dune buggy. Well, the one thing is, I don't like having this just random giant antenna sticking out of his back. However, due to the way that it just plugs in there, you can see the sort of tip that it has. So if you were to detach this every time you transformed, you're not going to be wearing it out. So I thought I'd just go ahead and bring that out. Okay, so I know that this whole set, it has to make certain concessions to have the interplay connectivity between the Cobra figures and Soundwave. I get that. However, just looking at it from a Transformers lore standpoint, it doesn't make sense, because would Soundwave really let these monkeys ride on his back? Now, when I mentioned about this not being a weapon for him specifically, that's because it's for this broad right here, just so she has something to do while she's riding on his back. And then on the promotional images, they had Zartan looking into the back of this jet engine like it was some sort of a scope. And I'm like, okay, So not only can Soundwave not use the only handgun that he comes with, because they have to make Zarana look like she's useful, but now are you taking away Soundwave's ability to operate his own shoulder cannon just so that Zartan also doesn't look useless? I'm like, man, I tell you what, from a lore standpoint, Soundwave would never let himself be this dependent upon humans. However, I do let it slide because, again, I understand that's what this set is trying to do, and also the fact that we can slightly offset it by having him wield a version of Megatron so that at least he has a gun of his own to operate, even though it is technically his boss, but you get what I'm going for here. And I understand from a G.I. Joe fan perspective, it's all about the human characters, but as a Transformers fan, it just feels like Soundwave had to have so many corners cut to incorporate them that I think it works against the figure as opposed to traditional mainline Transformers. So I felt it only right to end our video showing you some interesting size comparisons, because when we can stack him up against the MP01 Optimus, which, you know, we know that Masterpiece guys are a totally different aesthetic style compared to dudes like Soundwave. But as far as the height goes, while I personally don't have any problem with Optimus being so much bigger than Soundwave, I think in the Generation 1 cartoon, if I'm not mistaken, Soundwave is about the same height as Megatron, and Megatron is about the same height as Optimus. So if you disregard that, I think it would be alright. Now, the one guy that Soundwave will probably be hanging out with on the shelf will be his shelf bro Shockwave over here, which is the third-party Night Morpher Cyclops, or otherwise the Hearts of Steel Shockwave. And yeah, because I literally have an entire section about dudes that don't fit in with anybody else, and at least Shockwave has a friend now, I guess. However, before we go, if I can, I want to go ahead and share with you guys 3 interesting pickups that I got over this last weekend as of the time of this video. One of those actually being the Generation 1 Motormaster, which I don't think it's really documented that well overall that he has a base mode. And typically the little car that fits over his chest in Minosaur mode, that's what's meant to operate with this little base mode. But I do dig that this guy here, he can actually connect to Generation 1 Trypticon. And I use that term loosely as far as connection. It just kind of rests on a piece that's plugged into Trypticon, to be honest. But hey, it was 1986. What are you expecting? And as much as I love my repaint of the Kingdom Waspinator, I've kind of been wanting to get the original Waspinator mold. And this right here is the 2006 recolor of that original mold, and I think this is probably the most superior because, again, it's trying to harken a lot of the details that eventually this Kingdom repaint or the premium version of Waspinator finally achieved. So it's really kind of cool to have both these guys now. And my third pickup was actually that of the Tripredacus Agent, which, for those that don't know, this is actually Ravage after his death in the Beast Wars. He actually cropped back up looking basically as, this is basically just a recolor of the Transmetal 2 Cheetor. And I don't know if the Primeval Dawn comic books ever explained how he came to look like this. And it is ironic considering this is Ravage and here's his old boss, Soundwave. But anyway, I just kind of wanted to show you some of the really cool pickups that I got over the weekend. And really, that's all I have to tell you guys. And so I hope you guys enjoyed our look at Soundwave and his pets, Zartan Zarana and his buddy Howlback. And until next time, guys, we'll see you in another review.